Thank you, Right Honourable Speaker. This is a petition to the Parliament of the Republic of Uganda, moved under Rule 30 of the Rules of Procedure of the Parliament of Uganda. The humble petition of the members of the Uganda National Association of the Deaf, UNAD, and the Initiative for Social and Cultural Rights, ISER, represented by Honourable Samuel Helen Grace PW Representative Eastern, shows and states that, 1, your humble petitioners are members of Uganda National Association of the Deaf, a non-governmental organization that promotes and advocates for access to social services, including education and health by persons with disabilities. And 2, members of the Initiative for Social and Cultural Rights, a non-governmental organization established to promote the effective understanding, monitoring, implementation, accountability, and ensuring the full realization of social and economic rights in Uganda, including the right to education. Number 2, your petitioners monitor and document human rights issues in the delivery of education services in Uganda, particularly the barriers to access to quality education for children with disabilities in Uganda. 3, Article 30 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda guarantees the right to education, and Objective 18 of the National Objectives and Directive Principles of State Policy enjoins the state to promote free and compulsory basic education and take appropriate measures to afford every citizen equal opportunity to attain the highest educational standard possible. 4, the Education Pre-Primary, Primary and Post-Primary Act of 2008 and the Persons with Disabilities Act 2006 emphasize the right of children with disabilities to free, compulsory, and universal education. Number 6, Right Honourable Speaker, the fundamental right to education is also affirmed by a number of international and regional instruments that Uganda has ratified, including the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the African Charter on the Right and Welfare of the Child. The government of Uganda has made commitments in the National Development Plan 2 and Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030 under the theme, Leave No One Behind, where specifically CSDG 4 seeks to ensure the provision of a free, quality, equitable, and inclusive education for all. 7, government has taken measures to ensure access to education for all through both universal primary education and universal secondary education programs that have increased access to education by millions of children from poor backgrounds. However, Right Honourable Speaker, despite the breakthrough, access to equality education by deaf children continues to be hindered by various barriers and absence of reasonable accommodation in education institutions. Your humble petitioners further note that at the primary level, there are only 11 schools which focus solely in the provision of education to deaf persons, and of which 6 are government schools, while the other 5 are privately owned. These schools are complemented by more 45 deaf units which are attached to the mainstream primary schools, and 5 inclusive schools across the country where deaf children learn. Further, Right Honourable Speaker, that the situation is even worse at secondary school levels, where there are only 3 governmental deaf schools in the entire country. 1 privately owned school, which has a special unit for the deaf, and 4 others inclusive schools, of which only 1 is a government-owned. B, compared to the need, these facilities are not sufficient to absorb all the deaf children in Uganda, and that in many areas, children are enrolled in mainstream schools only to drop out due to communication barriers and high cost of hiring sign language interpreters. Your petitioners are aware that education is a right and a public good, and that is the duty of government to ensure that every citizen accesses education on equal basis without discrimination. Right Honourable Speaker, now therefore, your humble petitioners pray that Parliament directs the Minister of Education and Sports to ensure that the education sector budget for financial year 2019-2020 complies with Section 5J of the Persons with Disability Act of the 10% of the sector budget allocation towards the education needs of persons with disabilities. B, the Minister of Education and Sports and the National Curriculum Development Center to incorporate sign language as a subject in the secondary school curriculum, just as other languages such as Luganda, to provide an opportunity for those learners who would like to take it on as a language to extend the pool of people who can communicate in sign language. C, the Ministry of Education and Sports and the National Council of Higher Education to ensure that all primary teachers' colleges and university facilities and colleges of education in Uganda have a component of sign language to ensure that there is an adequate number of teachers with sign language training around the country. D, the Minister of Education and Sports to ensure that at the secondary level, schools have the necessary infrastructure to accommodate deaf students and institutions of higher learning, employ sign language interpreters such that deaf students enroll for programs of their choice in institutions of higher learning without the burden of additional costs. E, the Minister of Education and Sports to collect and keep data on access to education by persons with disabilities. Right Honourable Speaker, and your humble petitioners, as a duty one, will ever pray, and thereto appended that your humble petitioner signatures are attached. Right Honourable Speaker, I want to beg that I lay the whole document and the petition on the table. I beg to lay. Thank you, Right Honourable Speaker.
Let the records capture that. Thank you, Honourable Member. That petition stands